All right, guys, Murph's here. And today, at viewer request, we're going to discuss gun-free zones. We're going to discuss how or what the options are for how you should behave about gun-free zones as a CCW holder, and then kind of go into information that you should input in order to be able to make an informed decision about what you should do when it comes to gun-free zones. Now, first off, guys, let's go ahead and get some caveats out of the way. I am not in any way a legal representative, so nothing that I say should be construed as legal advice. This entire thing is just based off a conversation of what it is that I've observed over the years whenever it comes to... Cat's messing with my cable. Whenever it comes to gun-free zones. So the whole purpose of this is just to be able to extrapolate what the best choice for you is, which you have to take into account whenever it is that you make the decision and the best way to deal with the repercussions that may arise. All right, so with that, why don't we go ahead and define what a gun-free zone is. A gun-free zone is an area that does not permit the carry of firearms by private citizens. So gun-free zones do not impact law enforcement or anything along those lines. It is entirely geared towards the armed citizen. Now, there are a couple of caveats we'll get into here in just a little bit, but we're really going to focus on this right now. What are areas that can be gun-free zones? Well, generally, it's any state or federal building is going to be a gun-free zone. Places of large gatherings, so concerts, art shows, museums, stuff like that, those are going to be gun-free zones. When it comes to hospitals, schools, those are frequently going to be gun-free zones. Theme parks are almost always gun-free zones. Things along those lines. Places where a large number of people gather, or there are quote-unquote important people who are present. So, federal judges in a courthouse, or military installations are gun-free zones, except for, the military whenever they issue out weapons to people and all that kind of stuff. Those are places that are generally going to be gun-free zones, but also private businesses can identify themselves as gun-free zones. Okay, so this is already something that's very important for a CCW holder, right? Because you're at some point probably going to interact with these areas. Now, when it comes to places like government, state or federal government buildings and schools and all that type of thing, you're really not going to get away from the gun-free aspect of it. Those are strongly enforced for a variety of reasons. Now, we as gun owners know that gun-free zones do not work. That they are literally just a dinner bell for somebody who's looking to conduct evil. And that is unfortunate because now you have to wrestle with the possibility of not being able to defend yourself and your loved ones or your community should something happen in a gun-free zone and you are being compliant. And that's a tough spot to be in. To be 100% honest, guys, it is not an enviable position, but it's the position that we find ourselves in. So that is why this discussion is so important. Especially since in a lot of gun-free zones, they don't actually have effective means in place to be able to discourage some sort of violent act. And that's the thing I think that really bugs me the most. It's not so much that I can't carry in those areas, it's that my protection is not being adequately reinforced. A lot of these places at best employ like some overweight security guard who is armed with like a roll of quarters so that he can call the police, as opposed to actually having some sort of system to keep people out or to be able to react to a threat inside. It's all very reactionary and none of it is necessarily lethal, which is just, you're relying on the police to show up, which, when you need a cop, they are minutes away and you don't have that. So with this being the case, what are some things that you have to take into account? Well, first off, for a private business, because you're not going to get away from any of those other places, schools and stuff like that. You're not going to get away from that. But for a private business, does their signage declaring them a gun-free zone have the weight of law? And this might be kind of surprising to hear. Depending on what state you're in, or even what locality you're in, a gun-free zone sign may not necessarily carry the same strength as one would for a federal building or something along those lines. And that's something that you have to know. Just like whenever you're a CCW holder, you have to know whether or not you're in a stand your ground state, whether or not you have castle doctrine or anything along those lines. Hi, Leia. Wow, you're being very vocal today. What is your deal? Anyway. Yes, I know. Calm down. So, pick a spot. With that being the case, you have to know these things so that you know what your rights are. But we're going to get into it more here in a little bit. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be right. And we'll talk about that more here in a bit. Now, there are some people, I kind of mentioned this before, who have special rules for them whenever it comes to gun-free zones and concealed carry and all that type of stuff. First off, a court can decide to give somebody special dispensation with a special carry permit to be able to carry pretty much anywhere they want. I have no idea what it takes to get that. I have no idea what the prerequisites are. I also highly doubt there are very many judges that would actually grant it. So I would not gamble on this. I know, so like at my place of work, I cannot carry outside firearms. I can carry issued firearms and stuff like that. And I have looked into the process because that pretty much means that I am unarmed anytime I go to and from work. Like, once I leave the premises, then I'm not armed with a handgun. And I would really like to be able to change that. And I've looked into the process multiple times, but it is so convoluted that it's not even worth trying. And that's not to say that I haven't. I've asked the questions, I've sent the emails and stuff like that, trying to figure out like what the actual approval process is and who it is who finally gets to sign off on it and all that kind of stuff. And I pretty much got no reply, which to me pretty much states like, yes, we are required to be able to say that you can do this, but nobody has any interest in putting in the legwork to just randomly grant you this special requirement. So I have no idea what it takes to be able to achieve that. And then also, of course, you have LEOSA, which is something that covers off-duty police officers and stuff like that to be able to carry pretty much anywhere they would want to, just like they do as a police officer. And then also with that same type of thing, you have federal law enforcement, which can like carry on aircraft and stuff like that, which I think is pretty cool. Like, considered getting into federal law enforcement for that purpose. Leia, cut that out. So, there's our special dispensation type things, right? There's our special crowd who this conversation doesn't really apply to. For the rest of us, what are our options? Well, we have three options. One is not to comply. Two is to just not frequent those private residences. Leia. And then three is to comply and disarm anytime it is that you go into one of these gun-free zones. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at these each in order. So first, do not comply. This is a method, but it is probably the most risky method that you could employ in this case. And that is because regardless of whether or not a business has the weight of law behind their signage, they can still call the police on you. They still have the ability to be able to deny you access to their business for ostensibly, I'm not that up on top. I'm not on top of the legality of it all, but I'm pretty sure if they call the police and state that there's somebody with a firearm in their business, and they in some way intimate to them that you are being aggressive or you're making a scene, you're causing a disturbance or something along those lines, that's what the police are showing up with. And seeing as they're the ones who are contacting the police in this case, you're not the one getting your story out there first, you're kind of on the back foot. And I would also further guess that the vast majority of police officers, if they know they're coming into a situation involving a firearm, they're looking at you pretty hard. And the important thing to remember in all of this, if you choose the non-compliance route, is you're the only one who knows your true intentions. Nobody else is going to automatically assign you the good guy status. It's really no different in a self-defense involved shooting as well. All police know when they show up on scene is that shots have been fired, somebody's dead, and you're the one who's still standing there with the gun. So a mishandling of that situation could really cause things to go quite south. It's the same type of thing in this where, you get called, let's say you're in a state where where the signage does not have the weight of law. They call the police because they claim you're disturbing the peace and you have a firearm. Okay, now you're hoping that this cop wants to be reasonable. And here's the reality about police. I have respect for police, but every interaction with a police officer is an individual reaction. There is no reason for you to expect that they're going to side with you. And a lot of people in the Second Amendment community like to believe that the police will automatically side with us, and that is not the case. The fact that things like no-knock warrants exist kind of support that overall idea. Now, guys, I've worked with state and federal law enforcement quite a bit over the years. I've met some great guys. I've also met some terrible people. And at the end of the day, I know that the last thing I want to do is have to interact with the police. That's why I try to drive the speed limit. I use my blinker. I don't drive aggressively, all that type of stuff, because I don't even want to get involved in a traffic stop where I have a concealed carry handgun. Because we've seen circumstances in the past where that does not work out well for everyone involved. Now, if you're a person who kind of has a chip on your shoulder about non-compliance and all that kind of stuff, you're already setting yourself up to have a very bad interaction and a very good possibility of getting arrested. And here's the deal. Even if you get found to be right, you still have to go through the process of being arrested and the court and all that kind of stuff. To me, it's not worth it. 100%. This type of thing, it being the more likely outcome than me having to defend myself, I could see... I believe me, guys, I understand the whole point of carrying a gun is to be able to defend yourself because of the possibility that you might have to. And I am somebody who has had to deal with violent encounters before and am 100% aware of the fact that I am ultimately responsible for my safety. But that also includes my interactions with others. And that's the thing that you have to be very careful about. I don't want to get shot over just having a gun in a place that somebody didn't want me to. It's not worth the risk. We'll get into that more here in a bit because there's some more context that goes with that, but we're just identifying the overall idea. So if that's something that you found to be a little inflammatory, stay tuned for when it comes to my conclusions and you'll better understand where it is that I'm coming from. So that's option one. Option two, avoid those businesses. An awful lot of people are like, well, you know what? If they don't want to support my right to my Second Amendment and all that kind of stuff, then I'm just not going to go to their business. And that's absolutely an option. You can choose to spend your money elsewhere at a place that doesn't necessarily have an issue with you having a firearm. But just remember, you're probably not actually doing that much harm to that business because the vast majority of Americans don't conceal carry. Vast majority of Americans don't even own guns. So with that being the case, they're not bothered by gun-free zone signs. That's not something that's going to keep them from frequenting that establishment. That establishment is still going to make money. So just keep that in mind as to what it is that you're actually achieving. It's really not that much. And then your third option is compliance. You're going to this business for the very first time. You get up to the door, you see that they have a no firearms sign or whatever, and you go, oops, my bad. And you go back to your vehicle, you divest yourself of your firearm, you go into that business, you buy whatever it is that you're about to buy, you go back out to your vehicle, you put your gun back on, you go on about your day. Or you know in advance that you're going to one of those places and you just go ahead and pop that handgun underneath the seat or in the center console, wherever it is that you put it, and then you go on about your day. Now this is of course problematic because I don't like my handgun being off body. That increases the possibility of somebody being able to abscond with my handgun, and that's definitely not necessarily a good thing. But lock your doors, do the best that you can to try to ensure the safety of that firearm, and I mean, if that's the route that you choose, that's the route that you choose. So with those being the options, what do you do, Murph? What is your choice in all this matter? Well, guys, I've got to be completely honest. I hover between compliance and non-compliance, and that might sound really weird. Here's the deal. I sometimes carry into places that don't allow concealed carry. However, I'm comfortable in doing that because when I leave the house, I have done everything I can to diminish the amount of printing. I change up handguns based on whatever it is that I'm wearing and all that kind of stuff. And I check in the mirror before I leave to make sure that I am not obviously carrying a handgun. So with that being the case, if I go into a place that doesn't want me to have a gun, I have a reasonable expectation that they'll never know, because that's the whole point of concealment, is making sure nobody else knows that I have it up until I feel the need to use it. Maintaining that tactical balance in my favor so that I can defeat the threat before the threat knows that I am capable of doing so. That's why I don't like things like open carry and all that kind of stuff. And it gets into a completely separate discussion. But if you're properly concealing, it'll never be an issue, and you can freely decide what it is that you want to do. Now, if I remember in advance before I go into the business that they don't want me to technically have a gun, I'll evaluate it real quick and see how I'm feeling that day. Go, yeah, I should probably take this off. But I can tell you right now, guys, this comes back to the keenly aware thing. I am ultimately responsible for my own safety. And that is why I don't just carry a gun, but as we discussed in my EDC video, which if you're interested in now, throw the link in the description, I also carry a knife. So unless I go into a place with metal detectors that doesn't allow weapons at all, I have a knife available to me to be able to defend myself with. Now, of course, I would much rather get into a gunfight than a knife fight by a wide margin. Not a big fan of knife fighting. However, if I can't have a gun, I'll have the next best thing I can. And I will carry a knife, and I will defend myself with that knife if I have to. But I would much rather have a handgun available to me. And that's one of the things that helps me be okay with the idea of like, okay, well, I can't have a handgun in this business. That's all right, I still have my knife. So I'll let go of the gun for a little bit. It'll be okay. And, as soon as I get back to my truck, I'll put my gun back on. That's what I lean towards the most, because I've given myself options. And that's one of the biggest things about even carrying a gun to begin with, is that you're giving yourself options. You don't have to engage in a fight if you don't want to, but to give yourself the flexibility to be able to react to the situation is the whole point of carrying a gun, or in this case, a knife as well. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.